Hello, Comics Alternative fans. Before we start with the episode, we want to invite all of you to check out our Patreon campaign.
That's right. Go to www.patreon.com/comicsalternative for more details. There you'll find more information about the campaign and the cool rewards levels we have.
For as little as $1 a month, you can help us maintain good quality comics talk, and the more you contribute, the more perks you get.
These include monthly podcast episodes exclusive to Patreon supporters, as well as the chance to help us choose which books we review on the show. So be sure to visit www.patreon.com/comicsalternative and become one of our proud podcast patrons.
Yeah, and now on with the show.
This is the Comix Alternative Interviews, a conversation with Glenn Head. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comix Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this show, we have the pleasure of speaking with Glenn Head. His new book, Chicago, a Comix Memoir, was just released from Fantagraphics. But before we get to that conversation, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comix Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you'll find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at a whopping 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, including September, you're going to find incredible specials. Sometimes those specials are at 45% off cover price. Sometimes they're as much as 50% off cover price. But often you'll find discounts that go higher than that.
That's right. And this month, as in most months, they have loads of bundles that you can take advantage of where you can get deeper discounts on multiple comics from the same publisher than you would get if you bought those comics individually. And this month they have bundles, quite a few bundles from DC, Marvel, Valiant, and two of note are Vertigo bundles, where you can get the 4 new first issues of Vertigo series for 75% off this month, and the 4 number 2 issues of the new Vertigo series for 50% off. So check out those bundles.
And there are more specials there. You have to go to the website and check out what those are. That's dcbservice.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
Andy, we have a fun time talking with Glenn. And, we start off the conversation by talking about how different this book is, Chicago, a Comix Memoir. And it is very different from the other stuff that he's done, because I was primarily familiar with the shorter bits. And yeah, there's some autobiographical stories in there. But this is very different than the Glenn Head that I'm used to.
Huh. And yet this will probably, because of its, high profile publication from Fantagraphics, be maybe the first impression that a lot of readers are going to get of his work.
Yeah, and that's both good and also a shame, because there's a lot of older stuff that people can seek out. And I hope that after listening to this interview and then reading Chicago, that people will go back issue diving and look at the older stuff that he's done. But we have a great conversation, so let's hear what that was all about.
Yep.
We're pleased to have on the podcast Glenn Head. His new book, Chicago, a Comix Memoir, just came out from Fantagraphics. Glenn, thanks for being on the show.
Sure, man. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, for those who may know your work, they pick up Chicago, they're going to feel that this is a different kind of comic than what you usually create. So, for the uninitiated, how would you describe Chicago?
Okay, well, let's see. I mean, like the title says, it is a memoir, and that is quite a bit different than anything I've done. First of all, it's the first long-form book I've ever done, which in and of itself makes it completely different from the other stuff. I've been involved in a lot of different anthologies that I've contributed to, like, say, Weirdo, and others that I contributed to and edited, like Snake Eyes and Hotwire, and also contributed to, like, some different ones all around. And I've also done some of my own solo books, but they tend to be, I guess you'd really call that short form. And I don't know if the analogy is totally correct to say that a 5-page strip is just like a short story versus, say, a longer piece like a graphic novel, comparing that to a novel. But there are definitely comparisons that are there. So I guess that's the first thing, is the length. I guess the second thing, and what makes this book really different for me, is this is the most revealing, exposing book I've ever done about myself, and one that really is about my own history, about a lot of things that have happened to me, things that show me in a very vulnerable state, like I said. And I guess that's that's the first thing I'd say. I haven't done work like this before, so in that respect, it's somewhat daunting. In most other respects, though, it's really very exciting to be trying different territory, to not work the same side of the street that I've always worked as it is. So, yeah, I guess that's the first thing I'd say.
Well, I know in some of those earlier comics that you mentioned, where you do some of the shorter work, and I'm thinking of your books like Gutter Snipe Comics and then
Right.
Avenue D, you do some, I guess, what you could call autobiographic strips. But
Right.
even when you do so, I mean, what do you call yourself, or the Glenn character? Is it Chester?
I often have, yeah, and I didn't have a particularly good reason for that. I just came up with it, probably out of homage to Gould. But yeah, so I mean, I didn't do that in this book, and I was very consciously having this book be about me. I thought it over quite a lot, whether I was going to use a pseudonym, and I eventually came up with just using my name with a letter knocked off, just to show that there's maybe a percentage point of difference between me and that character. But I was really attempting to make this very much a real life work, and not have much of a distance between the sort of avatar, or whatever it is you want to call the alter ego that I'm drawing, and myself. I was trying to make it very true to life like that. So you're right, though. I mean, I have done other autobiographical pieces, but I mean, and this is the thing, I mean, it's a whole other topic completely, but what you can do with long-form comics versus what you do with shorter comics, they're just completely different animals. I mean, one of the things that really influenced me, not growing up, but when I went to art school and studied with Art Spiegelman, was Dick Tracy. Like, I really had that pushed on me. And looking at Dick Tracy, everything about that as an approach is about compression. The black and white aspect, the simplicity of the drawing, the simplicity of the stories, the simplicity of the characters. Everybody's good or bad. Everything's literally black and white, either visually or otherwise. And that is kind of antithetical in most respects, I believe, to what the graphic novel is about. Because even though you are not looking to allow a lot of fat into the graphic novel, you still want the story to be tight. What you are able to do is really open things up within a character and within a story and within things that happen. So you can really stretch it out and show a lot of a person's character, a lot of the subtleties that may be there, the nuances, etc. So that puts you in a really different territory if you're working in long form, from what I saw, Mm-hmm. I don't know if that answers any of your question.
Yeah. And, I'm also interested in what you said earlier about that in Chicago, you are laying bare some aspects of your life that in the earlier strips, whether somewhat autobiographical, we really didn't get much detail. Part of the reason may be because the shortness of the stories, but also just those earlier works are just different beasts, really. This longer form work, you do allow yourself more space to expose yourself. And at times, that exposure is not that flattering. So I'm wondering, as you were creating this, what were some of those thoughts about revealing parts of yourself that you feel a little uncomfortable about? Or at least that you feel were, I don't know, youthful indiscretions or different ways of looking at the world then?
I guess what I'll say to that is I felt like they were just totally necessary. There's no way you can do a story like this without exposing yourself, or you really shouldn't bother, is how I felt. So, I really needed to show, because I show, in a sense, a kind of degenerative aspect to my own nature. Starting at the very beginning, I'm in this graveyard, and I'm laughing, and I'm looking a little bit crazy. And from there, things go kind of south. I have kind of an obsessive relationship with the woman in this first chapter who is the child of Holocaust survivors. And she has already, by the time I've met her, worked as a prostitute. And from there, I go to Cleveland and I don't really show up for class. And I kind of go off the rails. So the way I'm setting the whole story up is that this is a guy who's not really all that well grounded in reality right from the get-go. And things from there kind of get worse before they in any way get better. And this is not really a story about things getting better. It's not exactly a story about things getting worse either, but it's about a story about things going where they're allowed to go depending on the choices you make. And the choices that are made very early on, some of which are discussed with my father, who's trying to help me straighten myself out a little bit, or trying to help me to understand reality a little better than I seem to. And my own interest is not in that. I kind of need to go out there and experience life as it is, as it's going to be, and as it's going to affect me. So I guess I felt that if I didn't look good in this book, that was probably the right direction I should be taking it, and I just had to accept that. I would not personally do a memoir where I was trying to make myself look good, because I really wouldn't see the point. So those are some of my thoughts on it. I just felt like I had to basically do it as truthfully as possible and let it go where it would go, you know?
You have that quote at the very beginning of the book from George Orwell about autobiography is only to be trusted when it reveals something disgraceful, right, which feels like it could be a manifesto for, that kind of autobiographical comic that, came about from around the time that this story starts, the stuff that Justin Green was doing and Robert Crumb and so on through creators like Phoebe Gleckner, who does the introduction of this book, that this book seems to really fit into that mode of autobiography.
I hope so. I mean, those are the ones that really inspire me the most, where I feel like the guard is dropped completely. And, those books contain things in them, or those artists have done autobiography that will not let you feel comfortable. And that is also something that I believe is kind of necessary, at least for this kind of book. For the artists you just mentioned and the subject matter that they dealt with, as well as the subject matter that I deal with, there's no easy way to do it. And you definitely don't want to gloss it over. It strikes me that if you're going to be doing a story of this kind anyway, you have to really dive into it completely and not censor yourself. So, yeah, I think all those things are true.
Yeah. That other epigraph, in addition to George Orwell's, which is from 1944, is one that is 50 years later, and that's Robert Crumb telling you, Glenn, do more autobio stuff.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of funny because, I always got really good reactions from Robert Crumb when I would send him my work, but they were mostly about the autobio stuff. And so I thought it would be great to be able to include that quote after I drew him in the way that I did Chicago chapter. And I felt like, frankly, that was really kind of this is maybe a risky bet, I thought, to draw Robert this way. But I also felt like I'd probably be able to get away with it, first of all, because he's not somebody who needs to make himself look good. And he would probably be able to handle it. And sure enough, that was the reaction I got when I showed him the book. I got a good reaction. And he actually said that I made him look like a spoiled prima donna and that I made myself look like a psycho. And I wanted to use that as a blurb on the back, but Gary Groth was like, nah, you got to get him to write something that's like a literal blurb so you can use it. So that's how that ended up. But yeah, I mean, and Crumb is a huge inspiration that way because he never tries to make himself look good. I would actually add sometimes to his detriment because I think that he actually, from all accounts, has done wonderful stuff in terms of helping other artists, both with Weirdo and really, being all for comics. I think he is not perceived that way because he has made himself look like this guy who is just this horny, creepy guy who's just lusting after women's big butts. But there's just much more to him than that. I mean, he really, is a very generous guy. I guess that's my main point. He's a very generous artist and person all around.
Well, that's interesting because that encounter that you reference in Chicago comes almost at the very center of the book.
Yeah.
And right before you meet him, I think it's funny. You attempt to shave yourself to clean up because, Skip Williamson said, clean yourself up. So you cut your face all up with his disposable razor and then you meet him and it's almost like, meeting your idol. It's a big letdown because he does, you're right, come across as this prima donna who seems a little distant. Was that the feeling that you got at the time?
Yeah, it kind of was, but at the same time, that's how it came across. I'm trying to think the particulars there. I mean, at the same time, he was really willing to try to help out, and he was going to show my work to Dennis Kitchen and all this stuff, and I blew the whole thing off. I didn't really know how to deal with any of it. But I mean, the main thing that really hit me, and this is why I drew this one panel during that encounter, is my experience growing up reading comics was very sort of wide-eyed and I guess really naive and innocent, and that I thought that this world was this wonderful cartoon commune of like everybody, all these cartoonists like loving each other and it all being just this fabulous thing. And I was trying to present the opposite of that, both in being in Chicago and being on the street, and also meeting Crumb as a guy who was vaguely embittered, which is a quality that does come across from him at various times. And I think I wanted that to show through sort of as a counterpoint to my own naivete. And the whole thing of my face being all cut up like that is kind of metaphorical for like what the whole experience was. Here I am all, slashed up and grungy and sort of at my worst and meeting this guy, and none of it goes great, which is kind of, probably how a coming of age thing ought to go. Why should it go great,
That just struck me as interesting too, reading that section, and I really do like that image you have there of the cartoon commune, because again, you read accounts of the early days of the underground comics of these cartoonists or fledgling cartoonists reading Crumb for the first time and getting into their car and going to San Francisco. And, that's it. Now I'm going to be a cartoonist. I'm going to find this stuff. And so there was even perpetuated this idea of this, this pilgrimage to this place. And then the human side kicks in, and you hear there's also stories of, infighting and jealousy and things that will happen when people work together.
Right. And that was something that would never have occurred to me. And then in actuality, in retrospect, seeing something quite the opposite, which really does make total sense, because for artists to be good at what they do, they've got to have pretty big egos, and those egos are not going to get along well with one another for the most part. That's just going to happen. So, I had my vision for how this whole thing was supposed to be, and then the reality of it that I come up against is just completely different. The other thing to factor in here, too, though, is that this story takes place in 1977.
Right.
And that was one of these real low points for underground comics where, they were just associated with like hippie trash and blacklight posters and all this really dated stuff that that had no value. And so it was just a low ebb all around. It was not a good time for the medium in terms of it being accepted, or a lot of the artists that had done great work. Like I mentioned Arcade when I meet Crumb, and all he says is like, that went under. It's all, shit. And so that was kind of the attitude at the time, that everything had really gone to hell. So that's another aspect of that kind of coming of age thing, where the thing that you dream of, not only is there maybe no place for you in it, it doesn't even exist for practical purposes, which at that time it kind of didn't,
Yeah, another thing that I find interesting about the book Chicago, your memoir, is that surprisingly, a relatively small bit of it actually does take place in Chicago, because there's quite a bit of page space devoted to where you grew up, still living at home, and then your early days there in Cleveland at the art school. And then almost the last half of the book takes place after Chicago, maybe not quite half. And so we only get less than half that takes place in Chicago, but it seems like that experience is defining everything that goes on during this time of your life that you're writing about.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I would put it. I mean, that like basically everything is heading towards that moment of sort of reckoning, which is what Chicago's kind of about. And then everything that follows it is about how it affected me. At least everything in the book that's shown, but definitely that was the idea, that there was a real reckoning with that in the chapter that follows Chicago, where I get back home and I'm back in Madison. I'm back with my family, basically, and I have myself to deal with. And that was really what I wanted to do, was to have the experience be whatever it was, as sort of harrowing and terrifying as it was, and then have my character come face to face with what that means and what now, So a lot of it was about what that experience meant, I mean, I think of Chicago, I think of cities like New York, just the mention of their names contains a kind of harshness, and that's what this book is about, is facing that kind of harshness and coming to grips with it, growing up, basically.
Yeah. Now, in the Chicago section, I mean, obviously there's a lot of rough harshness, as you put it, where you were literally living on the street, and you were a potential victim in a number of ways. But to me, the darkest part of this book, occurs when you're back in Madison, New Jersey, and it's when your parents are gone, you're by yourself, you have the house to yourself, and then you discover your dad's gun, his handgun. I mean, that to me is the most disturbing that the story gets.
I would agree. Yeah, I mean, I really wanted that, to have that. Like, it's kind of hard to even talk about what that meant, but the whole thing of walking around the house naked like that, which you can't do when the family's there. So it's like, from that moment on, it shows that I'm basically allowed to be exactly who and what I am. And of course, I'm presenting it on the page, so people are seeing it. But in that moment, it's like you're watching a character who's completely vulnerable and completely uncovered. And what's he going to do now? And because everything up to that point has really not gone well, especially on a psychic level. When you see him walking around and you don't really know what he's up to and you don't know what he's going to find, and then he does find the gun, he pulls it out of that hat box and he's just standing there naked holding this gun, and he's kind of wowed by it. That's a dangerous place to be. And I really wanted that. I really wanted him to be in a very dangerous place, because a guy like that with a loaded gun, you really don't know what he's going to do. So I like it that you found that to be disturbing, because really a lot of the rest of the book, I definitely wouldn't call it standard issues, some kid going out on the streets and finding the world. You do kind of know that when he's in Chicago, he's going to probably come out of that and he's probably going to survive it. But it's kind of going against, if not narrative convention, then some sort of decency or common sense, to show this character with a loaded gun in his family's house, naked, and then going up into the attic with it and seeing what he'll do. It is disturbing, and I don't think it should be seen any other way. In a funny way, I also found it kind of funny because it's just so absurd and so ridiculous to be shooting the shit out of your family's attic with a .38. But yeah, I can see where that would be disturbing, definitely. Yeah.
In fact, it's in that section where we have, this is what, on page 125, a completely black page.
Yeah.
And what that could represent. I mean, realistically, it plays a part in the story of what's happening at that moment, but also thematically, there's something there as well.
Well, yeah, and there's on a earlier page in the book, it shows my character like he's just walked in. This is actually on page 11, and it's actually one of the only other black panels in the book. My character walks home. He goes upstairs. He goes into his bedroom, and on the wall, there are a whole bunch of Underground Comics style art posters there. And then there's 3 panels that run down, and at the bottom one there is black. And I think that's the only other black panel in the book. And what you see there is he's got his world, just as his family has their world, that they present to you in the living room. You've got the living room couch, the pillows, the coffee table. Just as in my own bedroom, I have what I wish to represent myself with, which is those Underground Comics art posters. However, what's hidden is some porno magazines, Playboy and Hustler. My character closes the door and you have the black panel. And so that's kind of showing, that's as much as you're going to see here, because things are now going into territory that is closeted. In the same way that, what we find out, and this is something that I was attempting to work with in the book about this aspect of suburbia that is closeted, that my father is, by all accounts throughout the way you see him in the book, a very decent, good, caring man who happens to speak in platitudes, but is a good guy. Now, at the same time, he's got a gun in his closet. So, I mean, I'm showing that there are these things here that are being kept hidden. And when you get to that big black panel right after he's shot out the light, it kind of is meant to indicate a couple of things. One is that he's just shot the lights out, so it's black. The other thing is that this whole thing with the gun, the way it's played out, it takes place over the course of several pages before he actually starts shooting. And it's got kind of an erotic component to it. It's kind of meant to be kind of a dance of death almost in a way, that he happens to survive. And the end of that survival is kind of an annihilating orgasm. He's just shutting out the lights on everything, everything that was going on for the past 20 minutes or so when he was up there shooting, And the other thing I was thinking of in terms of this whole thing with the attic, it's this thing of, the attic as being kind of a repository for the family's unconscious, so all the white elephant stuff goes in the attic. All the old stuff like old photos, old stuff that you no longer need, but it sort of has an imprint of the family's consciousness on it. And so he has been basically, and this is why I believe that entire segment is kind of disturbing. You see at an earlier point that he's considered wishing death on his whole family in the Winnebago, right? That it's in my opinion more disturbing when people are thinking about killing other people than it is when they're actually doing it, because you have to coexist with their consciousness while they're thinking of doing what they're doing. So he's kind of wiping out his whole family by blowing away the portrait of his grandmother. So that's kind of a massively destructive act.
It's interesting that you parallel that scene with that earlier scene on page 11 with the black panel, because kind of the end of this scene is not just the black page or him or Glenn coming down the stairs and putting the gun away, but that also he takes those we assume are those same Playboy and Hustler magazines at the end, and puts them away in the top of the closet and locks it. Like that whatever was hidden in that panel on page 11 is also getting put away here.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's like that aspect of suburbia that I was mentioning, that things are closeted. They have to stay closeted. And the way I grew up, that's kind of how it was done. I never really understood why my father had that gun, but he did. And, these things are kept sort of under lock and key for practical purposes if you grow up the way I grew up,
Mm-hmm.
So you never had a conversation with your dad about that gun?
I'm trying to remember. I think at a certain point it may have come up that I mentioned it to either him or my mom, and then I took a look around the house some other time, and sure enough, it was gone. I think people used to just keep handguns around, though. He was not the gun type, as I say in the book, but he had one. So I think eventually they just were like, what good is this thing? We probably should get rid of it if people are like shooting the house up with it, So.
Now, you dedicated the book to your father, Glenn Oaks Head, and he passed away in 2012?
He did. He had dementia for about 10 years, and that was a long, slow process of someone leaving you. Yeah, so I felt like it was appropriate to dedicate it to him. And I was happy to have him in the book in the sense that I did, because we mostly didn't get along when I was growing up. And at the same time, I felt like he was basically a decent person who just didn't really understand me or what my values were or why I would want to live the life I've lived or do the stuff I wanted to do. He just really didn't see it. So in a way, doing the book was kind of like making peace with him,
Yeah, I was going to ask, did the idea for doing this long-form memoir occur to you before his passing, or maybe while he was in that state of dementia where he was at least mentally leaving you and the family, or was this something you had planned well before?
Long before. I mean, I think that somewhere in me, I probably thought, in those moments when I was in the attic with the gun, I remember like literally thinking, this is really fucked up shit, and if I survive, this could be something. There was that part of you somewhere in the back of your mind thinking like that, and I think that did occur to me. And
someday using this in a comic?
Not exactly that, but somehow, yeah, that this is just so extreme. This is such an extreme thing to do. I know that I was very aware of the material in Chicago as being, I thought, very valuable because it was pretty unmediated. I didn't do it out of any feeling of, wow, it'll be really romantic and poetic to like go on the streets and have some crazy Rimbaud-esque adventure or anything like that. I wasn't capable of thinking like that. I was just much too crazy and just naive and really aware of how things worked. And so for that reason, the fact that I did all that, I didn't have a good reason for it, made me want to work with it as material, I think, from a long time back. And, you mentioned autobiography in some of my earlier work. And what really kind of hipped me to autobio in the first place was being in art school back in the early 80s, a few years after this story takes place, when Art Spiegelman was insisting on autobio, and we had to do comics about it. And once you start doing that, and if you feel that you have an affinity for it, you then start, instantly looking over your own history and thinking, what could I do that might have some resonance to it, So I think for those reasons alone, I was always thinking of how I could use this as material, or thinking that someday, if I get a chance to do this, I would like to do this. So I think that's how it works. So I think things percolate for quite a while with the memoir before you're actually ready to, deal with what's in there.
Well, one thing that happened in Chicago that apparently had a lot of meaning for you is that meeting with Muhammad Ali. And it obviously appears in Chicago, but I went back through, and in an issue of Avenue D, that same story in shorter form is there as well. So was that one of the defining moments of your experience in Chicago?
Yeah, it was. And I mean, I think the reason for that is, first of all, it was such an off the charts kind of experience in meeting somebody on the street and having what was really like a street theater type experience, because that's just how he was. He would put on a show in front of, 10 or 20 or 2 people all the time, no matter where he was. And he happened to be doing it that day outside of Saks Fifth Avenue. And he like pulled me into it. Like he like looked at me as I was looking at him, and I probably looked kind of like a crazy street person. And he just yelled at me, did you call me the N-word? And I hadn't said anything, but it was strange, because I was thinking, I wonder what he would do if I yelled out something outrageous, just like I have in the book. And right after I had that thought, he looked at me, and this whole scene started and escalated. And I also, in truth, I experienced it to be almost like a kind of magical realism when it happened, because, and this is referred to at an earlier part in the Chicago chapter. When I was in 7th grade, I'd been picked on kind of unmercifully by this kid who was a Muhammad Ali fan. And I always hated Muhammad Ali for that reason, because I felt like as a kid growing up in 7th grade, even that pop culture figures like Ali, they bore some responsibility for the kind of behavior that they did if it inspired kids to do other stuff. And I felt like that was what Ali's behavior kind of did. So I always kind of held Ali personally responsible for this kid picking on me. And so when I met Ali on the street and I was able to, spar with him basically verbally, I felt like I'd kind of, won something back, So I think it was very important to me on that level too. But it also, just because it's such a completely surreal aspect to that, to being on the street and then meeting somebody and having that kind of run-in with them who's, a world-renowned figure. I just felt like this has to go in there, Well,
that's interesting. So you didn't incite Ali, because the way that it's written in both Chicago and also the earlier Avenue D story, you're thinking about doing something to get him pissed off or to get his attention, and we don't hear what you say, if anything. But then he asks, "Hey, did you call me the N-word?" And the assumption is that maybe you had, but in real life you hadn't.
I really didn't. I didn't. I would never have done that. You're not going to say.
You do a lot of weird stuff in this book.
Yeah, I know, but I don't think I do anything racist, and I definitely don't say anything racist. I didn't say anything to him. I know what you're saying, because what you're saying is that between the panels, maybe I said that and I'm just not showing you.
Right.
But no, that isn't what happened. It's just that he had seen me looking at him, in that crowd, and I think I stood out in the crowd for whatever reason, and because of that, he was gonna start some shit with me, because that's what he did. That he was always up for that,
Yeah, because the moment you say something, I don't have the page open to it, but you say something like, "Did you hear me say that?"
Yeah, exactly.
Which makes it seem like you may even be in doubt as to whether or not you thought something out loud that was going on in as you were kind of planning on doing something outrageous anyway.
Well, since I've told the story and thought it over many times, I have wondered, did I say it? Even though that I said it? Was I murmuring something under my breath that I didn't even know? But I got to say, I really don't believe I did. And I really spent a lot of time on this aspect of the story. I gave it at least 6 pages because I really wanted it to look like it felt, and like I gave like a long part of a page that shows me standing there grinning wolfishly at him, because that's what I figured I really must have looked like. I must have looked like, quite a character to him and most all the other people in this section of Chicago, which was the North Side. So, yeah.
And I love that it ends with the punchline that it does, where you think to yourself, boy, I should have asked him for a handout.
Yeah, no, I know. I like that. And I found out later that like it's true, because he was giving away money to everybody. He would give $50, $100 to anybody who said, "Muhammad Ali, you're great." He'd be like, he'd give you money, But fortunately, I didn't do it. It would have compromised the integrity of the story. And sure enough, I did then do better panhandling. Panhandling is one of these things where when you're doing it, you just hit a bad streak and nobody's giving you anything. And right after that experience with Ali, things really were looking up. And, I got out of it and I had a decent meal in me. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's not often in an autobiography, comics or otherwise, that panhandling is a big part of the action.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, in truth, once you're going to draw yourself panhandling, you better be willing to draw every other aspect to it because, you're on the street begging. And if you're going to draw that, it's not a pretty picture, And, I didn't want to make it look like I was, how would I put it? I don't know, a poor kid because I was not from, a poor background or anything like that. But I also did want to show that like when you're in a situation like that, really the only thing you can think about is food. There's this scene where I'm taking a bath because I just have nothing else to do. And I'm thinking that, I don't care about art or money or comics or bullshit or anything else, just food. That's really all you're thinking about. So there's a lot of panels where, it's very palpable that going on right outside the character's head is all the food that he wishes he could eat because that's all he wants. That's all there is. That's everything, You
mentioned something in that comment there about, kind of making a little bit of a comparison between the kind of economic status that you grew up in versus being in this moment of having to panhandle for food. And it does come up later in the book that you do end up, calling home at some point while in Chicago. Did that occur? Did that ever occur to you during that period of time that was an out that you had, that I'm panhandling now, but I could just call home and this would all be fixed?
Outlet that I thought I might use. I mean, I somehow wasn't going to allow myself to do it. It shows me at one point, like picking up the phone and I'm about to dial collect, and then something else happens. Somebody tries to molest me, and then that whole thing of calling the folks is forgotten. And that's pretty much how it worked. I don't know. I felt like I couldn't do it, and I didn't really want to do it for quite a while to have any contact with them. It's kind of hard to explain why. We were just on the outs, and I also just think I needed to live on my own and find things out on my own and see what happened for a while. I couldn't allow myself to ask for the help, though. I guess it was probably pride. By the time I called them up, though, it was Thanksgiving. And I think that the penny had dropped because at that point I was not on the street. I was not cold. I had food in me. And I think that the reason that I called them, I may not even have known it was Thanksgiving, but I called them out of some kind of realization that I had just disappeared for close to 2 months. And they had no idea if I was alive or dead. So it was probably at that point the reason that I called them was to let them know that I was alive,
Because they had thought that you may not be alive. Because didn't you mention that there were someone else at that school who had disappeared?
Yeah, and his body had washed up, and it took a little while to find out that he wasn't me. So, I mean, yeah, I had completely disappeared, and who knew if I was alive or dead? So, yeah, it's as a parent now, man, I sure wouldn't want my kid doing that. She's 14, and if she was gone for a day, I think my head would explode. Even if she was like 19 and had just disappeared. I mean, so it's a very extreme thing to do, Now,
you mentioned your daughter, and in the last part of the book, basically we fast forward from the late 70s, because it begins in 1977, then you have your Chicago experience. But then after that, we fast forward to 2010, and you're with your daughter. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, there is kind of I wouldn't call it a resolution, but there is, let's just say more positive and upbeat things that happen to you in that very last part of the book. But another thing I really appreciated about it, and maybe this was the more artistically crafted part of your memoir, is that it ends as it begins, where you're in the graveyard. Although this time you're not alone, you're with your daughter.
Right. Yeah. And I would say that is a resolution in a way, because I guess when the book starts, you can kind of sense, you already know partly from the front cover of the book and from the title page that things are going to head into some like dangerous territory, some probably not good places. And the way he's just splayed out in the graveyard laughing, he's on his own, and what he sees, you don't know. But it's, like I say, it's probably going to be some dark places. And I believe that there is resolution there when I show myself with my daughter there, because, how would I put it? I mean, we're going to be able to get out of there. You know, that's the last word in the book. She wants to know if we'll be able to leave. And I say, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure how much else I want to give away about that ending, but, there's a feeling that life has gone on and that I've learned something at least. And yeah, I'm not sure what else I want to say.
Yeah. Well, now that you have this first long-form memoir completed, do you have any thoughts of following this up with another memoir about your experiences in New York, especially the Lower East Side and Alphabet City during the 1980s, because there are a number of your shorter autobiographical pieces with the character Chester in, let's say, Gutter Snipe and Avenue D, that you could put those together, and that could be another memoir.
That actually, it's funny you say that, because my friend Tim Lane, who I think you mentioned in a message recently, he's always pushing me to do that, and I've thought about it. It's not a bad idea. I could do it if I can come up with a couple of other strips that would tie a lot of things in there together. Then yeah, I would love to do that. It would probably make for a good book. Yeah, I mean, it would be more episodic in that you've got individual chapters about this happening, that happening, and the next thing. But yeah, it's definitely an idea.
Before we get too far off of Chicago here for a minute, I wanted, since you brought up Derek asked about that kind of epilogue in 2010, one of the things I wanted to ask about with that was the style of depicting yourself in that section, because if it hadn't said, it didn't have a caption Brooklyn, New York 2010, the Glenn that's there and the Glenn that's a teenager in the previous pages, there aren't a lot of big differences visually. Was there any kind of choices that you made there that to make the 33-year later Glenn different from the previous one, or the 23-year later Glenn?
Let's see. Were there visual things that I decided to do to make him different? I don't know. I guess from what you're saying, he doesn't look much different. So I'm
just wondering if there's something I didn't catch, or if there's maybe, the way things kind of play out there that, and when you talk about the resolution at the end too, that there's a sense that there's a lot of things about Glenn in 2010 that are still the same, right? As
before?
Yeah, and to see that character, visually see that character continuously through there, through that big time jump without some significant visual changes, maybe reinforces that.
I can see where it would reinforce it. I don't know if I'm often told I don't look too much different than I ever did. So I probably kept it like that. I did try to draw more facial lines on myself just to indicate that.
And your eyebrows look furrier.
Okay.
Is that true? I didn't catch that. But I mean, if I'd lost my hair, I would have drawn that, but that didn't happen. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, but it's interesting if you say that, like, my character seems largely the same, because I mean, I guess I'd say to that my impression is that people don't change much. And the thing that I would say, I see my character in the last chapter as being a calmer and basically a much calmer seeming character in the way that he behaves towards other people. He doesn't seem like he's about to do anything crazy and run off and risk his life or anything else. And at the same time, you see that he's really in his own world in a lot of ways. Like he does have, speaking of resolution, he gets back together with this girl, Sarah, from the first chapter and has sex with her, which he had always wanted to do. But there's an indication that it hasn't changed his life. By the time they're done with that connection and he puts her in a cab, it's kind of, well, good to see you. And she leaves, and then that's that. And what follows there is Glenn's daughter, Kay, sees him in the bank, and says, "Dad, you forgot to pick me up from school again." So what kind of is indicated here is that, I guess, this is still really in his own world. You know, I mean, he was always in his own world earlier, especially in the graveyard. And here again, he comes back to that graveyard, and he's still in his own world. He's with his daughter. So.
Yeah, I was hesitant to bring up the Sarah encounter, but since you did, I mean, what to bring up the more kind of the sense I was getting was that, you know, we have this just reminded me of those kind of people that I've had in my own life over the course of, you know, several decades who kind of never leave my memory.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then when those things do happen where they come back even after 10, 20, 30 years, there's still an extraordinary sense of continuity between those times. You know, the kind of cliche is it feels like no time has passed. Right.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That was the sense I guess I was getting from that.
That no time had passed, that we were still in the same place, kind of?
Well, yeah, that you know, that Sarah especially had kind of occupied this important space in your mind, in your memory, and so that when she gets back in touch with you, even if you haven't talked in decades, there's still a continuity because of that, you know, that memory of that person comes up over and over again throughout your life.
Right. And there's also a continuity just in terms of character, because, I mean, when we first see him and her, she has already, as I said, you know, sold her body for money. She's prostituted herself. He has porn magazines that he's hiding in the closet. When you go forward 20 or 30 years, it comes up that she's worked as an escort. And when that chapter begins, you see my character leaving a strip club.
Mm-hmm.
So there's continuity there. And that isn't pretty, you know? That's showing that where she was and the choices she made then colored her life and really affected it. And as big surprise, she had a drug problem. And big surprise in my case, I had to overcome my drinking problem. So we see that, you know, and again, I guess that's where the resolution of me with my daughter in the graveyard carries some meaning. Because if I was just alone a second time, it's just like, well, okay, I wonder how many more years before I actually end up buried in here. But when I'm with my daughter, it's kind of a life goes on thing. So she represents, I guess you could say, you know, life going on and hope too.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, you mentioned your drinking problem, and one of the things that strikes me about Chicago is outside of having to panhandle, I mean, there's really not much on the side of debauchery that goes on with you in Chicago. But if I look at a lot of your earlier comics, those that do have that autobiographical tinge to them, I mean, that side of you seems to come out quite strikingly. And so, again, it gets back to what I was asking earlier, and I think what Tim Lane is recommending that you do, or hopes that you do, is maybe, you know, turning those stories of your time in Alphabet City in the Lower East Side into a book, because that seems like a side of you where things do get a little out of control. Maybe not in the same way as Chicago, but because you have a couple of stories in Avenue D and Gutter Snipe, I think, where you're living above a strip joint.
Yeah, Topless Bar.
Yeah, on the Topless Bar. Yeah, man, that's some wild stuff that's going on there with you at the time.
Yeah. that was, in my late 20s, and like, what would I say about that? I mean, I'm just trying to remember how all of that happened. And basically, I did 2 strips about that. One was entitled Belinda's Topless Go-Go Lounge, and the other one was called Random Factor, which was actually kind of about how I ended up in that topless place, or rather living above it. And that had to do with a friend of mine, an English expat guy who was this hipster guy who did construction and was killed in a construction accident. And anyway, Rupert, yeah. And both those stories really, I think they capture that era of that kind of living. And it's funny, that was the one time when I remember doing something like kind of thinking like, wow, this is like living in a Tom Waits lyric, when it became the thing that we were going to do. It was kind of like, almost like living as a lowlife with quotation marks on it. When you're living above a topless bar and your landlord runs the topless bar, it's like, this is a character and this is story. And eventually, years later, I hadn't even realized that was good material. And Mark Newgarden was teaching a comics course, and he was like, you got to do this as a story. So I did. And there was a lot of craziness during that time, a lot of really messed up characters, and a lot of I also associate that, though, too, with when you get out of art school, at least back then, me and a lot of my friends had gotten out of art school, and what were you going to do next? If you didn't have a career lined up, you had to have some kind of day job. And I was working as a messenger and drinking and and taking drugs, too. And this is basically kind of what you did because you didn't have any other plans. So a lot of that lifestyle was sort of reflected in that, where it's like, now what, Yeah. So,
well, a lot of the aforementioned autobiographical strips and some of your comics like Avenue D and Gutter Snipe, but also those that are collected in other places like 00, Weirdo, and then your own Hotwire, they remind me, especially the non-autobiographical stuff, the kind of surreal, wild comics, of some of the stuff that you'll find in the work of Kim Deitch. And, as I had mentioned, I'm in the process of doing an email-based interview with Tim Lane. And when I mentioned to Tim just the other day, it's like, I'm going to be interviewing, or Andy and I are going to be interviewing Glenn on the show. He said, ask him about his experience with Kim Deitch. He said, because there's a reason why, you get this Deitch feel. And he was telling me how you really studied closely under Kim.
I think he made it wrong a little bit. So he wanted you guys to ask me about Kim. I mean, I guess here's what I'd say. I mean, I grew up reading a lot of undergrounds, and I was into Kim's work. In the time I was reading underground comics, I would always read his stuff and reread it, and I wasn't sure why. And I eventually realized that the reason was, of any of these underground cartoonists, and that includes all these guys in the 60s and 70s, he was the man in terms of storytelling, any of the stuff that he did these 2 great comics called Corn-Fed, and he contributed to a lot of different comics then. And that's the stuff that really blows me away. That's the stuff that I really admire. And in truth, I haven't followed his work in quite some time. I don't read comics as much, but that stuff really worked for me. And I think when I was in art school and I was really working on the craft of storytelling, that was one of the things that I came back to. And around that particular time, me and a lot of the other guys I knew that I just mentioned, like Mark Newgarden and I guess Paul Karazic and Kaz and other people, we would be over at Art Spiegelman's place. And one time Kim Deitch came in and he saw this I had done. The strip was called Classic Gator. You can see that there's an influence by him.
Oh yeah,
in that strip, and he just loved it. And so we struck up a correspondence, and that's kind of how it went. He was really a big supporter of my work. He was trying to help me get my work into Weirdo and other places. He was a really big supporter for quite a while, and. Yeah, so I mean, I guess what I'd say is that at a certain point, I felt like I kind of needed to pull back from that influence because I don't want to draw like him. And I'm not so into the whimsy of comic storytelling at this point. I mean, I guess it's one thing I think of this quote, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And right now, what I'm really interested in is, especially done this book, is telling my personal story as truthfully as I can without making it cute or whimsical or anything of that sort, and trying to stick to that story. So that's really something that I've been very much aware of in terms of what my approach is. I guess in terms of studying with him, no, that never really happened. I just, I was friends with him, and
well, not literally study, but that he had a big influence on your work.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what I can add to what I just said. I mean, I always thought he was underrated. In particular, the fact that he is such a great storyteller, and that was something that really influenced me. I think, in truth, that influenced me more than any of the visuals, the stuff that he does, because for me, I just kind of feel like it's all about the story. If you can come up with a really good story, that's the gist of it, and the art is really only there to serve that purpose. I'm more and more like that. As much as I love great drawing, I love Tim's drawing, for instance, but I love a lot of different comic art that's great. What I really look to it for, though, like when I think of work that I really love by Crumb or Phoebe Gleckner or Justin Green, that work really takes me several layers down into that person's conscious mind or unconscious mind even, and that depth is what I'm really looking for. I'm looking for that, in fact, more than I'm looking for story. I'm looking for that more than I'm looking for a really good piece of entertainment, for instance, a story that takes me someplace and gives me some laughs and gives me an entertaining punchline. I love that stuff. It's great, but it's not really what I'm looking for in comics, and it's not what I think of as the best comics that I've seen. When I think of the stuff that's really, really moved me, it's the stuff that goes several layers down there to express something and show who that person is and what they've been through,
Well, you mentioned other creators like Kim and Tim being champions of other people's work, but I want to ask you about your efforts at championing other people's work, especially as editor. I'm really sorry that we only have 3 issues of Hotwire Comics. When the last one come out, in 2009? Because I thought that was just a great anthology, and in fact, at the same time that Hotwire was going on, we had Fantagraphics doing, another one, Mome, and Mome seemed to collect work from a lot of, I guess, newer artists, most of which at the time I wasn't familiar with. Now I am. But the thing I love about Hotwire is you're dealing with maybe a generation earlier than the Mome crowd, but even more importantly, a generation that is more heavily influenced by the underground comics movement.
Yeah, I would say that's true. I mean, I didn't keep up with Mome, so I'm not sure who a lot of the artists were in there. But yeah, I mean, there were people who I was running in there who, and here's a good example. Mary Fleener, I always thought that she was a terrific storyteller. Mm-hmm. And she, to me, was kind of like the equivalent of like a rock and roll band that's toured a long time and has really great chops. And so a lot of ability to really tell a good story. She could really do that, and that was something that was really important to me. There were other people in there too, like Mac White and Bob Sikoriak. There were some new people who I managed to get in there, though, and in a way, I thought of Tim as one of them because Tim's work was not really well known, and Tim Lane. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess one thing I'd say when it came to editing, putting out books like that or Snake Eyes, although that was done with Kaz, I think what really excites me when I've looked at anthology books over the years, and you could include in that, say, Mad Comics, even Mad Magazine maybe, then also the Zaps, and then going all the way up through that, all the different books like Bijou and then all the way to Raw Magazine and Weirdo. The thing that's really exciting in those books is the kind of visual collision that you get with all these different artists who have amazingly different styles and amazingly forceful styles too. And it's that kind of collision, that mashup of all these different styles that makes for just this great juxtaposition. And I think that what you get when you get that, though, it becomes about the juxtaposition a lot of the time. It becomes about this kind of style explosion, which I think is great. I don't think it's necessarily all that great for narrative. I don't think Zap Comics, for instance, as much as I loved it because it felt like a kind of psychotic bad acid trip, you know, a lot of painful hallucinations and shit like that going on. I loved that part of it. But in terms of actually, you know, paging through it and reading comics, there was plenty of other stuff that, say, Crumb did that, you know, I would have probably gotten into more. But Zap came out of kind of the psychedelic experience with some of those other artists that were in there. I really loved that psychedelia, and that also, I imagine, in some way influenced Hotwire, because I love that kind of, as I say, visual collision. So yeah, that's what I was looking for a lot. I was really looking for people who had fully formed styles. You know, that's just something that's great. When people have really found their voice and it's really uniquely their own, that's really something that I always loved about underground comics, was that from a style standpoint, that stuff just was light years ahead of what had come before it, you know, including Mad and EC Comics, just in terms of pure style, you know?
Mm-hmm. Another thing with Hotwire, it's one of the few places where you can find the comics of Craig Yo.
Yeah, that's true. You don't see a lot of comics by him. He was in the first two issues, and I really liked the fold-out thing that was in there by him in the first issue. Yeah, it was good. It was good. But yeah, I mean, it was a good book. It was a good anthology book of a lot of different work. So it's too bad that it didn't continue. I agree. You know?
Do you ever have any thoughts of bringing back, let's say, maybe issue 4 of Hotwire or something that is comparable to it?
Probably not. And the main reason is that, like, from everything I gathered while I was doing it, and this is from the late Kim Thompson, you basically cannot sell an anthology. That is really pretty much what it is. And I thought about that a lot, because I think that the anthology really exists when it does often enough so that new voices can be heard and can break into, you know, the field, you know. That was definitely the case with Weirdo. There were a lot of cartoonists who made their way in to some kind of accepted consciousness in comics because of all the different issues of it, which were edited by, you know, 3 different editors. So there are all these great women artists, you know, I don't like to use that ghetto term, a woman cartoonist, but these, you know, Julie Doucet, Christine Critter, Phoebe Gleckner, their work really hadn't been seen, I think, in Weirdo until Aileen edited it. And the point is that, like, when an anthology really is working in that respect, I think what it means is that there aren't that many other vehicles for them to get their work out on. And if you look around, you'll see that there are just, like, almost too many vehicles for people to get their work out in now. And an anthology just kind of confuses the issue. It's like people pick one up and they're like, wow, how do I sort through this? You know? That's sort of my impression. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. You know? Whereas, like, you know, with a graphic novel, I think people really like that, because it can be someone's very well crafted, worked out vision of what their experience was in a different way than, say, a prose memoir would be or a novel would be, you know? I mean,
that's a good point. Because I'm thinking, you know, in you know, now there's just so many web comics out. So people with, you know, whose work isn't known, they can just do it themselves. They get a website, exactly. They start publishing it themselves. So what's the use of an anthology today?
Right, exactly. And also, you know, the whole digital aspect of it, as you know, completely changed everything, because there was a time when people started out with mini comics and they would sort of learn their craft. They would learn how to put that self-published book together. They would maybe figure out some form of distribution, and from there they would go to try to move up from there to maybe an anthology, and if they could move from that to a solo book. There was all this stuff that followed logically that, you worked your way up, and there were often a lot of editors around who could, be the gatekeepers. And of course, as we know, all that stuff is blown wide open. People, if you can get your work out in whatever way you can get your work out, who's to say? So that's where all that is headed,
This strikes me as interesting to think about when you're talking about the kind of role of the graphic novel today, because versus the anthology is one of the things that I wonder if it's either lost or transformed or needs another venue. Then is the kind of short form stuff that those anthologies were really good for. We're the 1 or 2 page or 5 page stories that you could get in a whole issue of Weirdo or any of these other anthologies. Where's the venue for those things?
Yeah, I agree, and I really think that's really a shame, and I think it's basically disappeared. I mean, there isn't that way of working going on right now where you would put together, say, a really good 5 page or 10 page or 15 page, fun narrative, that had some laughs and a good ride. It just doesn't really seem to be the thing anymore. And I think what's also kind of disappeared with that. See, one thing that I think that's really, it seems to me anyway, with the advent of the graphic novel, comics have shifted away from humor in terms of moving away from being, a cheap format, funny book into, this literature thing, which is therefore much more dramatic. A lot of the best known graphic novels that you would think of, like say Fun Home, for instance, it's not that there's no humor in it, but it's essentially a very dramatic, first person retrospective narrator story about, coming to terms with one's sexuality, coming to terms with one's father's suicide or whatever it was. And it's dramatic. It's giving you this very dramatic long form story, which really takes us away from what, comics had been. When you think of like so much of what Crumb did and what he really made his bones with, even though I think his autobiography is great and that's some of my favorite stuff by him, but he did these short, funny, sleazy comics, like Snatch and all this kind of stuff that was really not, intended to elevate. And we've been dealing with this kind of, elevating of the art form for quite a while now. I'd say at least the last 20 years or more of raising the stakes on it, making it more, if not acceptable or palatable, then making it like better art. That's been a very conscious concern, that comics need to be better art. Maybe that was always true, but it seems to be more so to me, Do
you feel that something's lost in this new context?
Yeah, I kind of do. The vulgarity. It's like that thing that you might hear about, when movies when the whole auteur thing happened and American movie makers started looking to European filmmakers like Bergman, et cetera, to make their movies, to elevate them somewhat. And the movies weren't then better than Americans made. It's like when you go from making a great rock and roll single to a rock opera. Maybe the rock opera will be great, but you're definitely dealing with attempting to elevate it, and therefore it can also be pretentious. So you can lose some of the vitality. And I think some of the vitality of comics that was sort of this cheap, wise guy, smart alecky thing of some guy in the back of the room making wisecracks. Yeah, that goes. That's definitely not there as much. It's there in some instances. I mean, actually, one of my favorite recent artists, who I think is going to be getting a lot more recognition, is a guy named Aaron Lang, who I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's done these. I think they're basically self-pub books, but this is terrible. I'm trying to give somebody a shout out, as they call it here, and I can't remember the name of the book. But the artist's name is Aaron Lang, Lange, and he's really good. And that stuff actually is really vulgar and pretty sexual and pretty explicit, but also really funny. And so anyway.
I just spent a week or so in a library reading old underground comics and stuff, and reading through, a run of Weirdo straight through, and among other the anthologies. And so what you're saying is just kind of made me think back about what that reading experience was like and what it almost did to my attention span. That, when I would be reading those and I would come across the occasional 10 or 15 page story, I'd be like, what the hell? I mean, I can't sit through this anymore. I'm used to these maybe 3-4 pages maximum. But I really started to appreciate that, and so this conversation is making me kind of think back to that really recent experience and realizing that that I was recognizing something in there that I'm realizing now I don't see much of anymore. And part of it may be too the vulgarity too. Yeah,
I mean. The vulgarity was really highly prized, the whole thing of, and it still exists. I mean, if you look at the whole Charlie Hebdo thing with that, where the problem I see with some of this as an approach, vulgarity as sort of, a jumping off point, is that in its own way, it's kind of reactionary in that, like, if you're doing something like S. Clay Wilson or something where somebody's getting their dick chopped off, and basically you're doing it so that you can get a big reaction, in its way, that's kind of, reactionary. It's not personal, and or at least it has a tendency not to be. And I think that's the one thing that if you watch how comics have evolved over the past 30 years or so, I mean, the personal became the thing finally. I mean, the autobiographical memoir in comics kind of, and I'm sure there are those who would disagree, but I mean that. If you look at the work that really scored recently, everything from Mouse to Diary of a Young Girl to or Teenage Girl to the other one that I just mentioned, Fun Home. That kind of became the thing. The personal story. How did something personally affect me, as opposed to the vulgarity thing of being really funny. Yeah.
The artist who really struck me in reading these, that, was doing almost exclusively autobiographical work was Dori Seda. Yeah. And there, the vulgarity is out there too, but it's so, it becomes after, especially if you're reading a bunch of them, so kind of endearing to,
Yeah.
Read about the implications of her having, that people think she has sex with her dog and stuff like that.
She was always halfway alluding to that as a possibility. I mean, right. The interesting thing that you saw there, and this is just like, I think an aspect of cultural stuff that's been going on for maybe the last 20 or 30 years now, which is, women behaving badly, and one of the big underground comics from that era, that she was in, Dori Seda, was this other one, Twisted Sisters.
Yeah.
That part of the reason for that, the excitement of that book, and it had a blurb on the back of it by Madonna saying, "These girls make me look clean," or something, and that probably really helped sell it. But the whole thing of bad girls acting out became this exciting thing, whereas we'd already seen this from guys doing bad stuff, but actually having girls do it and be shameless about it really kind of grabbed a lot of people. So, that kind of grunginess that you would get with Dori Seda or Julie Doucet or some of the other women artists of that era really hit home for a lot of people. People liked it.
Gregory.
Yeah. There's another one.
Chicago has just recently been released, and what kind of publicity do you have lined up for this book? Like, will you have signings, readings?
Yeah, I'm doing there's a party at Desert Island this coming Thursday. That's September 10th. And I don't know if you have, I should give you the address at Desert Island if you don't have it. Let's see here, it's in my phone. That's the comic shop in Brooklyn. That's excellent. That's one of my favorite comic shops, I got to admit. I'd say that even if they weren't doing the party.
Well, we can definitely put this in the show notes.
Well, good. It's Desert Island, 540 Metropolitan Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, 11211. And then let's see what else. There's I have this written down, November 20th to the 22nd. There's this Miami book thing that Fantagraphics is flying me to, that I'll be speaking on a panel. And then there's also this thing at Quimby's in Chicago. I've got that written down as October 5th. I'm going to be appearing with Bill Griffith, I guess, and we're going to be signing books, so there's that. Then there's also this Brooklyn cab thing. I don't know if you heard of that. That will be in November, but I don't have a specific date. I'm going to be speaking on a panel there and signing books. So maybe I should get you those specific details in better format after this. Announcement won't sound totally jumbled. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely this Thursday at Desert Island, 540 Metropolitan Avenue.
Well, it sounds like you have a number of things lined up to help promote this book, and it's going to be lasting into the fall.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Well, of what you can tell us right now, what are you currently working on, or is this kind of a calm period right now?
Well, this is kind of, because, I mean, I'm just dealing with getting the book out right now, so there's that. And but I actually have started another memoir book that is a childhood thing that is actually a lot more harrowing than this book, and it's another one that I've been wanting to do for a long time. And if you look, like I noticed you mentioned Gutter Snipe. There's a first issue there called Ultraviolence. There's a strip in it called Ultraviolence that is it alludes to a time I did at a boarding school, and that is a book that I've been working on, and I'm very excited by it. See, after doing Chicago and realizing I had the guts and the willingness, or whatever else it was, to draw myself in the way that I did, I could do this book too, the one that I'm planning on working on, which is, as I say, kind of a harrowing childhood memoir. And it's about this boarding school that I went to and how that affected me. And the boarding school was called Chartwell Manor, and that's the working title for the book. It was a boarding school in Mendham that lasted about 10 or 15 years. So I've been working on that. I've written probably 2 chapters of it, and it's gonna take its time. I really like working long form, though. I really like seeing where it'll take me, and I really like working with myself as a character. I find that kind of fascinating. It's, and you were right. I mean, I've done some measure of autobio for quite some time, and even most of the stuff that's more surreal is in one way or another autobiographically based. But to really work with material from my own past is now something I find really interesting, because enough time has passed that I find it possible to dig around in there and work with it, So that's something I'm planning on getting right back to, hopefully this week. It's just, as I mean, if you draw comics, so much of it really is a solitary pursuit, and some of that isn't good for you, but you learn to work with it, and you spend a lot of time inking pages and lettering and doing all this other stuff and trying to make the pages look the best they possibly can. And so that's what I want to get back to. I imagine I will.
Well, I hope you'll keep in touch and let us know how this new memoir work goes. But Glenn, we want to thank you for being on the show and talking about your latest book, Chicago.
No, I'm happy to have done it, and thanks for having me on, guys.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Sure. Okay.
So it was a good conversation to have on this new book, Chicago, that Glenn had put out. We not only talked about that book, but got into some other topics related to the world of underground comics and so on.
Yeah. I think that was just as interesting as his talk specifically devoted to Chicago, about his experiences, studying under people like Art Spiegelman and his views on how comics have changed over the past 20 to 30 years. Yep. So we had a great time. We want to thank Glenn again for being on the show. And if you want to find great comics like Glenn's Chicago, then you definitely have to check out the sponsor of the Comics Alternative, and that is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com. You're going to find some incredible specials. But if you go to their sister website, and that is instocktrades.com, you'll be able to find a great discount on Chicago, a Comix Memoir. So you pay $17.49, which is 30% off of the regular price, $24.99. And if you do a search on In Stock Trades on Glenn Head, you'll find that you can find volumes number 2 and 3 of Hotwire, both at 30% off the cover price. So instead of paying $22.99, you only pay $16.09. So I guess their volume 1 of Hotwire is sold out. But it's a great place to get your comics, whether it's DCB Service or In Stock Trades. You can't go wrong with those guys. And after you do get your comics, get in touch with us and let us know the kind of things you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find on the right-hand side of your browser a tab that says Send Voicemail. Click on that, and from the comfort of your own desktop or mobile device, you can send us a voice message through the wonders of SpeakPipe. It's very simple and easy to use. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right. Or you can get a hold of us by email. We are two guys at thecomicsalternative.com. Or at comicsalternative.com, or you can get a hold of us individually. I'm Andy at comicsalternative.com.
And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com.
And we also have our Twitter feed where we announce new content to the podcast as well as updates to the blog. You can check out our Twitter feed at the number 2 guys with PhDs.
That's right. We're also on Facebook, on Tumblr, on Instagram, on Google+, and on Pinterest. We even have a YouTube channel, so you can listen to our shows that way. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also listen to us on TuneIn. And as always, you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as our reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog. And that's at our website, comicsalternative.com.
That's right. All the ways to get a hold of us and find out what we're doing.
That's right. And we do like to hear from you. So why don't you grab your copy of Chicago, read it, and let us know what you think.
Yep.
Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy. See ya.